Alright gang, welcome to our first video in this course relative to the actual content. Up to now we just talked about course layout, how it's all set up navigation wise, and the attendance verification aspect. But for now, here's the text that we're using. I've switched to this, trying to get away from the Cengage products that I've got no control over, we have very little control over. It costs you a bunch of money, and this is free. And we're going to shift, at least I'm shifting both the classes I'm doing this semester over to this kind of format, where you don't have to pay for the text, you don't have to pay for the resources. And we can be dynamic with it and modify it as we go. So we're trying to stay more current with the other things that we've been using previously. We got locked into version specific resources that were difficult to change over time. So with this, in this text, and I'm not limiting you to just this text, the text is our primary resource here, but I'm also, as we go through this course, I'm going to point you to other resources, many of them within this O'Reilly repository, that aren't going to cost you anything. They may be in video format, course format, book format, a variety of different formats. Some of it may not be Server 2022, because even though at the time I'm recording this, Server 2022 has been around for over a year and a half, pushing 2 years, there's still not a ton of stuff out there academic resource wise. So with that said, the first section of this text is going to involve what is server, generalities. That's this chapter 1. Then we'll slide on into Windows Server 2022, then installing Windows Server 2022, and then the things you need to do once you get it installed. So these first 4 chapters are all the nuts and bolts of doing the installation, why, what are our options, and making sure everything's right once we do the install. So I'm going to have some virtual machines you'll have access to remotely. You'll be able to do remote installs on a Hyper-V system. You can also do it at home if you have a system that has Hyper-V enabled on it, or potentially you can do it on VMware or any of the virtualized environments. But let's stick with just chapter 1 for this video. And chapter 1 is getting started with Windows Server, and in a nutshell, let me go ahead and navigate to it. If it'll let me, there we go. In a nutshell, chapter 1 for everybody that's in this course should be an absolute review of things you already know. You should already be familiar with operating systems, types of networks. The prerequisites for this course covered what's in chapter 1. I'm not digging deep into a refresh of something you should already know. But what I am going to do is slide through what we've got to cover in chapter 1. And in the videos that follow this that I provided in Module 1, I'll point you to some important, either a video on the OSI model or a free video series prepping you for the Net Plus certification, which that's something you should already be prepared for or maybe already have achieved. So the refresh is, make sure you're good with what networking is, the OSI model is, how subnetting works, those concepts. We'll deal with those deeper into the course. I'm going to focus on these first 4 chapters on what server is and how we get it loaded and set up. But once we get it set up, and in the other 2 subsequent courses, you've got to have that foundation from the CET2000 course. Okay, so with that said, you got to be familiar with the technical requirements, how much RAM, how big a hard drive, whatever it may be, to be able to do the labs that they've got within this text. Now, they've got the expectation that you can run Hyper-V on your machine and run server in a virtual environment. You may not have access to that, and I don't require that as part of the course, since I am ultimately going to give you access to a virtual machine over the internet. Not everybody has access to the same kind of resources, so I can't expect you to have a specific system available to you. So, with that said, you need to know the requirements of the system that we're dealing with. And when they talk about here technical requirements, they are, if you want to do the exercise at the end of this chapter, that's what you would need to be able to do that exercise. It's not the requirements for server, that's the requirements for the exercise itself. Okay. So by now you should know what a computer network is, how they talk to one another, how the applications interact with the network, how the OSI model works, like I said, and I've got a video that'll walk you through that. Here's a very generic topology of a network, and we dig into different types of networks here as, like I said, a refresh. Are we talking about a personal area network, a home area network, a local area network, and then it just goes on and on. Metropolitan area network, wide area network, all things that you should already be familiar with. Okay. Should know at this point the difference between client and server, how they interact with one another, as well as what a host is and what a node is. Okay. Now, one of the other things that you will need to know, and you can go refresh on it, is what TCP/IP is, the difference between the TCP part and the IP segment of it, as well as subnetting. Okay. You'll need to know the architecture of a P2P network, and the difference between that and a topology that we had mentioned up above here, a traditional local area network. Okay. So, as I said, we'll need to know the difference between IP version 4 and IP version 6, what subnetting is and the difference in subnetting from one to the other, and the different types of servers. Now, one of the things that you may not have dealt with in previous courses, and I want you to think about starting now, looking forward, is the virtualized environment. If we're moving things to a cloud and we're dealing with whether it's Azure or Amazon Web Services, looking at web environments and providing servers in whether it's AWS or Azure, whatever it may be, start looking at the services that we can provide. Okay, let me go grab something for you real quick and pull it over here. Okay, now I've switched over to a different tab, and here's a web page, and it's bmc.com, and they've got, and you could go search for this, a comparison of SaaS versus PaaS versus IaaS. Three different ways to look at networking or servers in a cloud environment. And this is where things have gone in recent years. And we're not limited to just these three different things, but what they break down to is one is software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. So we're in a way getting away from the traditional, oh, here's a server and it's got everything on it. No, we're virtualizing the machines, and I may have a server that has multiple virtual machines being hosted on it, and each one has its specific task. So I want you to be thinking ahead and start getting familiar with what these terms mean. How are they different from one another? Because I'm going to have some cloud-based lecture further on into the course to where we're not limited to just the traditional, that box is a server kind of mindset. Okay? So, let's go back to the text. We need to be familiar with what a CPU is, what RAM is, why are they important. When we're talking about computing, these two concepts are first and foremost, should be first and foremost in everything we do, followed by our throughput and our data storage ability. The CPU, supported or supplemented by GPUs today, is our ability to process transactions or to perform small tasks. The more tasks we can do at once, the faster, more competitive our system is compared to another. Memory is how much we have, I like to say how much I can have storage on my desk that I don't have to get up and go somewhere else to get. And the more stuff that I can put in RAM, the faster I can be without having to reach out to external data sources. Now, with all of this said, how big a deal is this? You know, this is a huge deal. I've worked on projects recently. I've done a lot of research in AI and healthcare and efficiencies of different programs, applications, and what we're doing. And I decided to work on a project, I don't know what, about 6-8 months ago now. And I just wasn't thinking about how much data I was dealing with. And when we're talking about a lot of data that we have access to today, when you think about ChatGPT, Bard, and the rest, these are systems that are running on servers. And the servers have to be able to process massive amounts of data. And that all rolls back into what kind of CPU do you have? How much power do you have? How much memory do you have available to support that? If you have massive amounts of data, that's a lot of work that's got to get done. A lot of transactions, if you will. The CPU has a lot of work ahead of it. So instead of just relying on one CPU, what if we deal with multiple CPUs, multiple cores? Dual core? Oh, I'm going to go with 10 cores. So that's the kind of things that computer hardware, we've got to be familiar with that coming into the class. As well as, like I said, memory itself, depending on how much data we're going to hold at any given point in time for processing, that will take up our RAM. The disks, the hard drives that we're accessing, how fast are we? We're talking about solid state drives. We're talking about the traditional old school hard disk drives that have moving parts and they're slower. Costs between these two are just crazy different between one and the other. We need to have an understanding of form factors when it comes to the footprint of the devices. Okay. Traditionally, we'll deal with blade servers, tower servers, rack-mounted servers, and we've got to be familiar with the terminology and the physical difference between them as we go through it. All right. Now, if this is the first time you've seen this term, NOS, well, okay, we're talking about a network operating system, and that's Windows Server. It's a network operating system. And it has to be capable, as it says here, of managing, maintaining, and providing services within a network. Now, a lot of stuff, like I said, is shifting out to the cloud. We've got to think about that. But we'll go through and look at different ways we'll interact with server, different types of server, whether it's Windows, Linux, which would be Ubuntu, Mac OS server. So there's different types of server operating systems. And within the latest iteration, Windows Server 22, there are different types or versions of Windows Server 2022. Okay? So go explore that when you get to the end. We'll talk more about that in the next module. And at the end of this module, you need to be able to go through and correctly answer all 10 of these questions. That'll be homework for this first module. You'll also do a discussion, go out, bring something back, a resource that can help somebody else out within this first module. How can we enhance the course in this first module? Tips, tricks, insights, whatever you can come up with in the discussion. And when it's all said and done, the last thing you'll do in this module will be to complete the reflection. And that reflection is, how'd you do? How long did it take you? What'd you like about the module? What'd you not like about it? Give feedback on it so that we can enhance it, make it better, term to term to term. All right? So I will see you in the next module, but I've also got 2 more video links on this module page for you if you need that refresh. All right? See you in the next module.